Well, hello and welcome everybody, and welcome back to Vox Day Community. We're here in the cafe today. I'm with my good friend John Bowles, who's the pastor of Beggar's Table Community in the Crossroads of Kansas City. I'm Rustin Smith, the pastor here at Vox Day, and boy, we are deep into this conversation now, John. Yeah. This has been, I think we're into maybe installment 19 or something like that. Mm-hmm. We've been working our way through Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which is known as the Sermon on the Mount, the central teaching of Jesus, probably a collection of things that he said on a regular basis. That was designed to be most likely some kind of like constitution of the early church. The central teaching of Jesus, but also kind of the architecture of life together for the earliest Christians. So during this time of distance and pandemic, we've especially leaned into this because Jesus said at the end of this sermon, as we'll find out, that these are words that we can actually build our lives on. We can architect our families, our interior lives, our communities, probably nations, on this kind of life together. So it's so deeply important for us to dig in, to look closely, to reflect and understand. And so here we are again, coming back to it. Today we're in chapter 7, and where are we going to start today?
Well, I will add on to what you said. I think that we both knew that COVID season was going to last for a while. And so we've kind of intentionally made the Sermon on the Mount teaching stretch out. It's 19 weeks and counting now.
Right.
But it's a lot of teaching. As you said, it's 3 chapters. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons we picked it is because we were like, we want something that really takes us through COVID. Now, it probably won't take us all the way through COVID, but still.
Not at this point.
Yeah. There's a lot of content here, though, and it's been really good. But I think that in some ways you can see the Sermon on the Mount as the blueprint for relationship, for the way that we need to conduct relationship. And that statement means more when you think about what I often talk about with Beggar's Table is our relational dimension of life, so in other words, really, if you stop and think about it, all of life is relational. We have relationships with one another, and of course on its most surface level, that's what the Sermon on the Mount could be about, is our relationships of how, especially what we're talking about now, how we relate to one another. But we also have a relationship with ourselves, and so that relationship with ourselves is so important, and the Sermon on the Mount addresses that. And we also have, of course, our relationship with God, and then we also have a relationship with the environment around us, the world, And so if you think about it, there's 4 relationships that we have. And one of my favorite ways to talk about sin and to imagine sin is as disruption in those relationships. Right. So there's brokenness in all 4 of those relationships. And of course, healing, restoration, ultimately shalom, comes from being put back together in all 4 of those relationships, to have harmony in those 4 relationships. And the reason I mentioned that is because I feel like the Sermon on the Mount, that's really the core of what it is. It's like, this is how you have community. Okay. This is how you have community with each other and with yourself and with God, and this is what we lean into. Yeah,
the healing of relationship, but in 4 directions. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Now, as I said, in particular, in Matthew 7, we're really diving deep into how we relate to one another, and in all of the different things that can pop up that cause disruption, for lack of a better word, in our relationships with each other, in our communities. And it's funny, Rustin, because you and I, we get together and we'll sit around for hours. And in fact, today we did this. We'll talk about issues we have in our relationships and in our communities. And it's never easy. It's hard. I mean, it's important to say that even for us pastors,
if not especially,
maybe especially for us pastors, we don't have it all figured out. We're navigating our rough relationships all the time. And maybe that is the role of a pastor. We're in charge of a community, and we're kind of helping to everyone navigate the bumps. And
that wasn't on the brochure when I signed up.
Exactly.
It's true, though. And then, I mean, gosh, I think it's been hitting especially hard the last few weeks as people have had to navigate school decisions, and it's been rough in our family to figure that out. But I also recognize we've got it pretty easy compared to most families in that regard. And I mean, then that's just one of so many pressure points right now that's putting pressure on our relationships, not only with one another and not only in the church and our families, but our relationship with ourselves as we deal with our own anxieties and fears and uncertainties. And certainly, we could probably name how it's putting pressure on relationship in every all the four directions that
definitely.
you mentioned.
Definitely.
So yeah, we made a bit of joke of it today, but as we were talking about this passage today being especially about relationships, we were both like, I need that.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear what Jesus has to say this week.
Yeah, people won't believe us, but in fact, we were sitting in your office talking about situations that we're going through, and we actually started talking about Matthew 7 as it related to what we were because it's so applicable.
Yeah.
Now, of course, what we did this last time is we took a pericope that is meant to go together, and we divided it into two. We like saved the last part for today. Yeah. So we started, therefore, we probably need to spend some time reviewing what we talked about last week. So we started in Matthew chapter 7 in the first 5 verses of that, which basically have to do with how we see one another and the planks in our own eye, not to judge too harshly the specks in each other's eye. And there was so much to say about that. I remember thinking so much of that has to do with humility. Humility is the key to our relationships. In other words, recognizing that we always have something in our eye that and let that be our guide as we try to navigate with other people who we're always irritated with because they have such bad things in their eye. Yeah.
Right. One of the things that stuck with me is not only just more awareness increasingly of all the many planks in my own eye of who do I want to help me with my eyesight, and it's those people who are also doing their own work.
Yeah, you had a great story about that, about some guy that you had met in your church and had something to say to you, but it was done with such humility and gentleness that it meant a lot.
I tell this a lot. It was early on when I was a pastor, and an older guy took me to coffee. And it was one of those things where you get grabbed on Sunday and it's like, hey, can we get together this week? I have some concerns. And then
worst words in the world.
I've learned to say, no, we can't. We can talk right now about your concerns. But
I can't lose sleep every night until we have that conversation.
Because that's what happens.
Yeah.
But this was offered in a new way that I hadn't heard before, and I've used it ever since as a measure of like how to do this well. He was a guy who just cared deeply about me, cared about the church, and was seeing something going on in the church that he had real concerns about it. But the way he shared it with me is the point. It was in the spirit of something like, look, I'm seeing this thing going on, and I just wanted to make you aware of it. And now, I don't know everything that you know. You see all parts of the church. I just have my own perspective. But I thought it was important enough to say something about, so I'm just bringing it to you, and I trust you to take that and put it with all the other data that you have to care for and the other concerns, and I know you'll do the right thing about that. I just wanted you to be aware.
Yeah.
And I went away from that going, no one has ever talked to me that way before. That is really good. It was humble.
Yeah.
It was an acknowledgement that he couldn't see everything, that perhaps he has his own specks and own planks and he just sees what he sees. He was being faithful to help me see.
Yeah.
But he also didn't pretend that it was the whole story or that, I took that as something that I measure every conversation against in a way. I'm like, here's a good way to do it. And I try to do that more myself.
Yeah. I love that story.
Yeah.
Because what makes me think when you tell it that I could handle a lot of people's concerns if they were all presented that way.
That's right.
If the person saying it said, hey, listen, I don't know everything and this is what I see, but you do. Yeah. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden my job just got easier, But
it doesn't seem that way. Somebody said, we are perspectival creatures. We live from perspective. We only see what we see. And it really takes a great deal of maturity to acknowledge in real time that the thing that I'm seeing may not be the only angle or the only story. There may be other sides to this or things that I know nothing about or the way I see may be deeply influenced by some things that aren't as healthy as they feel because they just feel normal. And there's a lot to that.
You listen to our language right now, and this is one of the reasons why I appreciate Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7. Because he uses the language of eyes. Yeah. And at first it could seem strange that he's talking about our eyes and specks in our eye, sawdust in my eye, whatever it might be. Yeah. But I love the eye as a metaphor here because we keep using the language of how we see things. And if you think about it, when we talk about human relationships and community, whether it's families, marriages, or churches, or businesses, all of our community boils down to how we see it, how we view it. Whatever we are experiencing is how we see it. And so it's like if you're a counselor, and you and I as pastors have both been in counseling sessions where we are the counselor before. Yeah. And when you listen to people that you're counseling, whatever it is that they're describing in their situation is how they see it. Yeah. Premarital counseling is largely about, let's talk about how you're seeing things, because we have to adjust your lens, because we tend to have a distorted lens when we go into marriage. Idealistic distortion, they call it. Idealistic distortion, which is exactly about how we see. So when we're counseling people, they're describing the way that they see their life, the way they see the other person, the way they view the whole experience. And what Jesus is pointing out here is just a universal truth. And it's that every person sees with some amount of distortion. None of us necessarily see clearly. However I see a situation, however I see another person is going to be spun or twisted or distorted somehow by myself, by my own lens.
I think that's really helpful, because one of the things that when you start talking this way, inevitably someone will get nervous that it's starting to sound like, well, there's no real true version of reality. There's no truth. It's just the way you see it and the way I see it, and our views are equally valid. And it's kind of a slip into anything goes, and that there is no center. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying humbly, none of us is made in such a way that we can stand objectively on a pedestal over here and look at things and see them as they are. All of us have distortion in our vision.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that because Jesus isn't saying that. That's not the issue that Jesus is tackling here. He's talking specifically about how we deal with one another, not about how we see larger truths and stuff. He's talking about the fact that in our interpersonal relationships, in our communities, none of us see each other clearly, and none of us are reading the situation necessarily purely. So the thing is, Jesus doesn't resolve that for us as much as he simply gives us this instruction that we are to live in humility, knowing that. So now we can tackle situations going into it, knowing that the way I see it's not necessarily accurate. The way that gentleman did with you in your church, when he said, hey, listen, I know I don't have all the information, I don't see everything. I mean, that's humility. So it all leads to this question that I think helps get us into the passage today, which is really the same passage, it just carries it on. The question is, when you know that somebody in your community or that you're in relationship with, when you know that person isn't seeing things well, when you know there's a speck in the eye, to use Jesus' language.
When you've done your plank work, and you're ready to sensitively help adjust the distortion in someone's scene.
What are the safe protocols for doing that? How do you go about doing that?
There are none. Run away.
Run away.
Don't do it.
How do I correct my wife when I know that she's mistaken, right?
No. Come back from the ledge, John.
Come back from the ledge. Just don't do anything. Which, it's funny, we joke about that, but that's one of my questions that I think Jesus' teaching says something about here. Is that ever an option, just to maybe not engage?
Well, sure. I mean, of course, I'm making fun of what I'm too apt to do, which is to avoid something that's difficult. But I do think that he opens the door to that, because he's going to be talking here about how this speck removal and plank removal and this confrontational thing that needs to happen sometimes in relationships, how it happens.
At the very least, we can take away from the fact that he's teaching this at all that this is a really sensitive issue. It is not easy to course correct somebody. It's not easy. It never is. And so Jesus gives us some real wisdom here about this.
Well, the words are cautionary from the beginning of this section, because it's do not judge or you will be judged. And so already he is saying, and then he goes into the speck removal thing, which is talking about the sensitivity of touching someone's eye, right? But it's like danger from the beginning. You're about to do something that if you do it wrong, it's going to come right back on you worse than what you're giving out. So he's got our attention here by the time we get to today's verse.
And he goes on and he says, I'll just read it. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, he says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. That's another cautionary tale. It's another cautionary language. But let me just throw this out there. When I was younger, and like a kid or whatnot, and I was reading this, I think my first interpretation of this was that Jesus was simply, this was just another example of how we draw lines in the sand and say some people are idiots, and we keep I mean, don't give dogs what is sacred. It was a way of saying, let's identify who the dogs are in the world, and let's don't give them anything that's worthy.
Right.
And it sounds real condescending to call people pigs and dogs.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things we want to do today is challenge this notion that this is not what Jesus is saying at all. This is a much deeper truth than just there's pigs and dogs out there.
Yeah.
And usually they're the non-Christians, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, what comes to mind is the time when Jesus interacts with the woman who challenges her place with Jesus to be able to receive his teaching by saying, even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the master's table. And Jesus was so moved by her and affirming of that idea. So yeah, there's no sense in which any of this reveals that Jesus thinks that dogs and pigs are terrible creatures.
Yeah, it's
not what's going on here.
More of a revelation about how we just are as people. Yeah. So this is an insight into human nature.
Yeah.
In a relational dimension. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's true about that to me is a dog and a pig. I mean, part of it I think is that they lack the discernment of a human, right? So a dog can't tell the difference between a pork chop and a ribeye,
right?
Right, of expensive milk or sour milk, or there's no discerning taste among pigs. They'll eat whatever you throw to them.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, both animals are really driven by their appetites, and nobody loves dogs more than me. But that's just saying it what it is. I mean, my dog loves me the most when I feed it, when I have a treat for it.
Yeah, there's a reason your dog loves you.
Yeah. And so both of them are driven by their appetites. Like you said, there's no discernment necessarily, but I don't think this is as condescending as it sounds. Both of them were domesticated animals, and both of them were loved by people. It's just, if we're talking about feeding, then we're talking about being careful what we feed them.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, we are careful about the advice we dole out to each other.
Okay.
And some of the advice that I could have for you may be a real pearl. It may have a lot of wisdom attached to it. But when I read this, what I hear Jesus saying is that not everyone is at a place where they can hear that wisdom and accept it.
Because a pig doesn't care about a pearl. A pig just wants to eat.
Yeah.
A pig doesn't know what to do with a pearl.
Right.
Right.
And it might even be biologically that a pig can't digest a pearl. And so their hunger is not going to get satisfied by what you just said.
Yeah.
And the human reaction, let alone the animal reaction, is usually to turn on you. If you say something that someone they cannot digest, then they might attack you. Now, there's plenty of examples of that kind of thing happening in life in general. But I think it calls for great wisdom. One of the things we have to do is discern when we're talking to someone, is this person at a place where they can hear what it is that I think I want to say? And that's a trick, right? I mean, it's really hard. It's one of the things that causes us to try to work on being gentle in our teaching and our sermons as pastors, because I've got a congregation and I want to serve this so that everyone can digest it.
There's no doubt. My teaching over the years is definitely based on the relationships I have with the people who come to our church. So, occasionally there's been a complaint of, you need to say this, you need to preach this. And I'm like, you don't even know anybody here yet.
Yeah.
like I'm trying to actually help people with their actual lives. Or we're not here to, it's not a pep rally. Like, get to know the people around you, get to know what their needs are. And then you might agree, to preach something like what I'm preaching, or do it better. But we're actually, you're actually trying to give something that is useful to a person, and not waste pearls.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, useful is a key word.
Yeah.
Because the pearl, even though it might be brilliant, it's going to be useless, and in fact, it will actually work against you if you throw it out to people who can't hear it, or to a person who can't hear it. Yeah. And again, the dog and the pig thing is not condescending. I could say this. Like, even within my marriage, I'm like, boy, Carrie is stressed from school, and especially now, COVID season, she's teaching all virtual, and she has high stress. Rustin, I've got brilliant things to say to her, and I tell you almost every night, if I say my brilliant things to her, it does not get a good response. She doesn't care how brilliant it is. Yeah. She simply wants to vent and be left alone. Yeah. And I have to do that because
which is totally valid.
Yeah, it's
because
totally
of what
valid.
She's going through, and that's why Jesus here isn't condemning dogs and pigs. He's kind of making fun of an owner who can't tell what it is that the people around them need.
Yeah, right.
Right. He's challenging the wisdom of the person who is wasting good things on something where it's just not appropriate at this moment. Yeah. It's not what is needed.
So there might be times when it's appropriate, even if you see, you see something clearly, you think, and you need to help somebody else see clearly. There are times when it's appropriate not to. Yeah. Yeah. You had a quote from Pope John?
Yeah.
Pope John about that.
Yeah, I've used it on our staff. It's one of our mottos that I forgot about, so I need to revisit it. But he said, see everything. See everything. So I think that's good because we don't go blind when we're overlooking it. You see everything. Overlook a great deal. Correct a little. That's his 3 instructions, right? See everything. Overlook a great deal. Correct a little.
It's beautiful. That's Matthew 6 put in different language, really.
It is.
See everything. Overlook
a great
deal and correct a little. It's up to you to use wisdom.
To
try to see what to correct.
And it reminds me of this thing that came across in Proverbs when I was in college. I think it might have been a college professor that first pointed it out. Because, we're all fundamentalists and literalists in college, and we all just want the answers so we can go out and browbeat people with our Bibles and save the world.
The young love that.
Yes, that's what we all think we're going to do. Proverbs 26, though, has this lesson in it. It says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, which is, a way of saying don't correct. Don't go around correcting foolish people. Or you yourself will be just like him. And I'm just like, man, that is just the truth. One of my mentors once said, don't argue with a fool or people might not be able to tell the difference.
That's so good.
That's basically the same proverb, right?
Yeah, that is so good.
So don't answer a fool according to his folly, you'll be just like him. You'll just get sucked into this silliness, right? And don't do it. But here's the very next verse. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. That's the next verse. And so you're like, wait, what? You just told me don't answer a fool, and now you're saying answer a fool.
It looks like it's contradicting itself.
Scripture is contradicting itself, and so nothing's true. And so throw it out, and we've disproven Christianity.
Yeah. Which is the opposite of using that thing on your shoulders, your head, right. and saying, boy, maybe the calling here is to develop the ability to use wisdom. I have to decide. I have to figure out.
I mean, that's the lesson, right? There is a time. I mean, in this particular case, what it means is there is a time to answer a fool, and there's time to keep your mouth shut because you're going to ruin relationship. You're going to break things down. There's a time to sit and listen. There's time to give advice. And you won't be married very long unless you learn that pretty quickly, right? Or at least you'll be miserable in any relationship if you don't learn when that is.
Yeah, I think I thought when I became a pastor that part of the job description would be all these people would have questions and I would just get to help give advice and answer them. So what I discover, of course, is that almost no one has any questions, So again, it would be easy if everyone was asking, but few people ask. Yeah. So you still have to use that muscle of wisdom trying to discern. Yeah. Yeah.
When is there openness? When have I done my own plank work so that what I'm saying isn't just unhelpful? Because I need to be able to see clearly and see what's really going on. Yeah. Most of the time when we talk and have strong opinions, we don't know what we're talking about. We're just looking for validation and relationships. So it's not always worth arguing every silly thing. Yeah.
So I want to reiterate what Rustin just said because it's really important. This teaching is done in a specific order. Yeah, it is. And the first thing is that we do our own plank work. Yeah. So again, that can't be said enough so that we are at least aware that the way that we're seeing things has its own taint.
It's kind of like at least you're coming to the conversation with some humility that, I just had a plank pulled out of my eye and that doesn't feel very good, so I'm going to be real sensitive
Yeah.
with your eye. And also, who knows if I might have more planks, because
Yeah.
I didn't know that one was there until I pulled it out.
Yeah,
And
I think that Jesus says
Right.
the plank's in your eye.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
it's just be aware of that, and
Yeah.
then you go into the course correction. But even then,
Yeah.
you're still using wisdom of whether to say anything or not.
Yeah.
But it's all futile if you haven't done your own plank
Yeah,
work.
that's right.
Plank work, I like that. Do
Plank
your own
work.
plank work. But
It sounds like yoga or something, but
it does.
I like it. But it's also that sense of like, if I know that you are doing that kind of work, then I feel a little safer allowing you to speak into my
Sure.
life, right?
Sure.
Because you know something about the pain of being reoriented or being wrong or having embarrassed yourself deeply.
Yeah.
That I know you know that and what it's like if you're coming to me and saying, Rustin, there's some things I'm seeing and I want to talk about this perspective, then I'm gonna perk up.
Yeah.
Even if I hate it, I'm gonna be like, I know at least John knows how much this hurts, so I can trust him.
You're going to be less piggish.
Less piggish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's right.
So
So tell me about.
I
This is
wanted
the
to-
metaphor of Jesus.
yeah, I wanted to add some
Yeah.
this insight, which I mentioned to you earlier, but because I really believe, Rustin, that in this is just to tack on to this conversation, that there is a way for us to evolve and to change from being pigs to being collectors of great jewels.
Yeah, that's good. That's
so
good. From being pigs to being pearl aficionados.
Yeah, people who actually value the pearl.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's an easy transition at all. But I would put it this way, though. So counseling, although there's a part of me that really loves being a counselor, like when I say that, I mean like a therapist, which is part of what we do as pastors. Yeah. There's a part of me that finds it really difficult for a lot of different reasons. But one of those reasons is that, okay, I'll meet with a person or I'll meet with a couple and they'll start talking to me, and it won't be long until I feel like I have a pretty clear picture of what they're saying and what's going on with them. And usually what's really going on is something a little profound. Like it rarely has anything to do with exactly what they're talking about. It usually has something to do with something much deeper and over here that you need to look at this. You probably haven't looked at this before. So I'm not just...
There's almost always a difference between the presenting issue
Yeah.
and the thing that's actually needs to come
Right.
into alignment first before you...
So real therapy is never just managing a situation.
Right.
Real therapy is always going below the surface, because it's below the surface is what. So,
Yeah.
but what my point is that when I'm being the counselor, I usually feel like I'm getting a pretty clear glimpse of below the surface through what people are saying. Yeah. And what's hard for me is that I always just want to say it. I always feel like we could keep this really short, 1 week, because I'm like, I could just say this. Oh, what you need to look at is here. Well, you haven't done this. But what I have discovered is that people don't respond well to that. Like when I just say what people need to hear, usually there's some kind of backlash. People are offended. They get really hurt, because
honestly, though, how many minutes of pastoral work did it take for you to realize that wasn't a good approach?
Well, yeah, I'm probably more dim than most. But I realized that the skill of a therapist, of a real therapist, is that in what I've realized is that it's not just to tell people what's wrong. Yeah. You have to guide people so that they discover by themselves what's wrong. Yeah. You have to ask the right questions so that they see the issue. So in Jesus' language, a therapist takes people along by asking the right questions to get someone to discover the pearl on their own, and that's the brilliant part of being a therapist. Yeah. But it's also, I find that to be really hard. Like when you kind of know the pearl, like here it is, like bringing people to a place where they can see it. Yeah. That's the hard part, and that's the trick. But if you don't do that, it will go badly for you. Yeah. But this is the thing. I think that the process of therapy is really cool because I think that it's the process of turning people from pigs to collectors of pearls. Yeah. I think that that's what happens. I think that in all of you therapists that are listening are welcome to borrow that language, because I got it from Jesus. But I really think that that's what therapy is like okay, right now you can't handle the truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring you on a process of where you love this pearl. And and to be fair, that process, that transformation process, I think that it sometimes takes years.
Yeah.
And it's not overnight.
No, almost never. I mean, certainly there are examples, and probably in our own lives, of Damascus Road kind of insights, flashes of insights that instantly change everything about the way you see. But even that's a great example, because Paul then, after his Damascus Road conversion, disappears for 10 years and comes back Paul, the great apostle. So change is slow in all of us. It's not that we don't have flashes of insight or things that change us profoundly. That happens to me in movies sometimes. I come out of a movie and I'm like, everything is different. See the world totally differently.
Get that.
But real change, it's slow, it's deep, it has to be negotiated in time. And I just want to reiterate that I think partly because of our culture, dogs and pigs, it's derogatory almost. I mean, I would never call you that. But in this context, there's no shame in being a pig.
Right.
It's just that a pig is not in a condition where they are ready to appreciate a pearl, even if they saw one.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is coming into kind of a new awareness, appreciation, becoming a connoisseur of fine things and the value of things, rather than just what immediately satisfies me, which frankly, when we're in crisis, is where most of us are.
Right.
We mostly just need to figure out how we're going to get our kids in school this week, and keeping an eye on our financial situation, and we're constantly tempted to live at a piggish level, which is just about what is it that's satisfying us, and are we surviving? Yeah.
I think that it's changing into the kind of person that can hear truth and value truth about themselves and about their situation. Now, I just think that this is an important part of this teaching not to leave out, is that idea that people can change and they can become people that will hear the truth, but it's a slow process. So I think that, whereas maybe earlier in my life, I kind of heard Jesus saying to simply dismiss people. I think it might be the opposite, Rustin.
Yeah.
I think that what he's saying is, that person that you're concerned about, that person who can't hear the truth that you want to tell them, you're going to have to be committed to that person for a long time. And you're going to do some work with that person. They will come around to becoming the person that can receive your pearl. But it's going to happen. This is a call to community. It's going to happen over a long period of time. Yeah.
And oh, by the way, you're also that person.
Yeah.
Because he just set us up with plank removal and speck removal, and he's reminding us up front, hey, we're all on this journey to becoming, moving from pigs to appreciators of.
Don't look now, but all those people around you, there's probably some of them doing their work on you over years and years.
I know that's true in my case.
And maybe that's a great picture of community, just people like, it's another way of acknowledging that none of us are perfect and that we're all broken. And that's fun to say, but in reality, what that means is that we're all hurting each other in different ways. But we have pearls of wisdom for everyone, but we're all taking our time till we can become the people that can receive.
Yeah, and maybe that's a continuum to keep in mind of the distance between being piggish and being somebody who can appreciate pearls as something that we exist on. And I think of my best intentions in the morning that kind of devolve toward piggishness, but the more hungry I get before lunchtime. And the grumpier I get with people, and or as the week goes on and the pressures build, and so I think we're always existing between this capacity to appreciate higher things and just our base level. We need our needs met.
It's good. Well, it takes time. It takes time, and I think that bleeds real seamlessly. It's not a coincidence that the next passage that we talk about is a passage about searching and longing for things. Because searching for truth is not something that happens overnight either.
That's right.
Seeking.
And there's a sense in which value is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, Jesus is the master teacher, of course, and he's using pearl here. Specifically, he uses a pearl in another place to teach, and what he's talking about in that context is, of course, the gospel itself. The message, his message of the kingdom, and giving himself to that message in all the ways that he did. It says in John, there's a passage in John 1 where it says he he, Jesus, was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, that is the story of the pig and the pearl.
It is, isn't it?
Right? Mm-hmm. So Jesus, I wonder often if there's another level to that, only because he uses that pearl metaphor in another place.
Mm-hmm.
That the pearl that he really cares about is this pearl of, here's life. Here's the good news of life eternal. Life reconnected to God, to neighbor, to environment, to self in healthy ways and healing. Here's the message. This is the pearl that I've come to give. And you're not always ready to receive that pearl or recognize it. And people walked with Jesus and didn't recognize the value of what he was saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cautionary tale in this as well.
Yeah. There's something true about that, how we resist the truth.
Yeah.
How we resist what we need.
Yeah.
We
keep doing, I'll just speak for me. I keep doing the very things that keep breaking or hurting the health of my relationship to myself or to my neighbor, or to the environment or to God.
Mm-hmm.
Those are constant things that need attention.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rustin. That's really good. I don't know how we are in time. I have a story about this.
Yeah,
but, are you sure? Because it's kind of cheesy.
I'll cut it out.
Okay, you edit this out if it doesn't work.
Terrible.
But a lot of people in my church know that for years and years before Beggar's Table, I worked with high school kids in Young Life, and I gave a talk on one of our Rad Dog road trips once. And it's funny because it's this issue, and I told them this story that one time when I was in college, I went to Daytona Beach on spring break, but I went by myself because my sister lived there. So when I went to the beach, that was just a crazy scene, and I mean. That's not a place for loners, but so you can imagine. But the funny part of the story is that while I was there, I guess I was so nervous being in this scene by myself, I locked my keys in my car. So my sister's car, and I'm locked out of my sister's car on the beach, Daytona Beach, and I was desperate to get into the car. And the funny thing is that there were policemen on the beach, and so I approached the policemen, and they were really rude. They were not there to help college kids, and they did not help me at all. And there was a hot dog stand that had hangers, and I asked them if I could use a hanger, and they let me use a hanger, but that didn't work. But the whole time that I'm doing this, there's what's on Daytona Beach at spring break besides college kids is motorcycle gangs. Oh. And there was a gang, like it's hot on the beach, but they're still in leather. Yeah. And black leather and long black hair, and they just intimidated me, and I stayed away from them. Yeah. So hours pass, and I'm trying to get into my car, and then finally one of these motorcycle gang dudes approaches me and says, "You locked out?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he opened up his vest, and inside were all these tools. And he just looked at the lock, and he picked one tool and went, "Kunk," and I was in. And the reason I told that story is I told all the kids, I said, listen, Jesus is kind of like that. I go, everyone is looking for fulfillment in life. Everyone wants to have truth and have answers. And the thing is, I guarantee you, just like I stayed away from the one guy on that beach that could help me get in the car, you guys are going to stay away from Jesus. Yeah. You're going to ignore the pearl. Yeah. You're going to be looking at, and you'll try everything else, whether it's sex and drugs and alcohol or whatever. Right. You'll try it all. But the one guy who can offer this, the gospel, like you said, the gospel of life, is probably the last person we go to. Yeah. So again, a little bit of a tangent. Yeah. But
And like Jesus, that guy then made you get a tattoo and give your life and utter loyalty to the king.
I said, "Can I pay you anything?" And he said, "Yeah." So that's why we all tithe.
Some debts are never repaid. So
yeah.
Oh man, that's so good. I used to love this quote about a rabbi who said that when I was young, I admired clever people. And when I got older, now that I'm older, I admire kind people. When I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I'm older, kind people. Yeah, so I feel like I made that shift in my early 30s, where suddenly Like, I'm just tired, and I want to be around some humility and kindness, and mostly I want it in myself. And I feel like that's the journey that Jesus is taking us on in this, is an openness, a gentleness, kindness, to bear with one another, because, man, we are all in this same boat.
And I think that,
and he does bring this this great value, and we have to become people who can recognize the value that's before us and reach out and be open.
The fruit of the Spirit ends up mattering.
It does.
It becomes more than a passage to memorize, but something that that's what matters to me.
It matters. Yeah. Well, thanks, John. We'll pick it up next week.
Okay.
There's some exciting stuff ahead.
There is. Thanks, Rustin.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Amen.